This here is a choose your own adventure style game. We are in Germany, we are in the Owl Mountains inside a secret Nazi base, and we are fighting our enemies. But all of a sudden our enemies are not our biggest worries anymore. No, because the ones that we have put in the ground suddenly start to rise up from the ground. And now we need to deal with zombies as well. This here is Escape from Projekt Riese, a game where you go out either by yourself or with your friends fighting zombies, or in this case trying to escape from them with your life pretty much being in danger the whole way through this game. This is a game that comes out on Kickstarter quite soon. I am going to show you how to set up this game and how to play this game. Now, what I have here in front of me is a prototype, so some things might change until you get it to your table. But here I will give you an overview of how you get to play this game in the future. So let's just have a look at this. So here we have the setup of the game. We need to put the big game book in the center of the table. On the left side we can see all the information regarding this scenario. And on the right we can see the map where we will actually play on. On the top you have a bunch of information telling you what is going on. Beneath that information you have some setup information. You have the different characters that you can play as, but also the zombies that you will face. Then we have some objective information about where the zombies will spawn, but also information about secondary objectives. These are objectives that you can complete during your mission, but you do not need to complete them to be able to finish the mission. But they might be good for you in the future. Then we have some things to remember while you're playing the game. Beneath that you have information on what you can find out on the map, and some in-between scenario information. Meaning that what will happen after you have finished this scenario and what can you do. And lastly, some information on what happens once you manage to finish this scenario. To start to set up the game, you first need to choose a hero. And again, you need to choose one from the pool that you have available. In this case here, we can choose from Kelly, Jackson or Frost Rye. I choose to take Jackson. And we need to place out our character on the square where it says A. Simply take our little standee and put them on the square marked A. In some of these scenarios we will also put out some objective markers. These here are the objective markers, and they are placed out wherever the text tells you to place out the objective markers. Next we need to see which type of zombies we are facing beneath forces. In your first mission, for example, you will only face the beta types, but in the upcoming missions you will face different types of zombies. Once you know which type of zombies you need to face, you take the zombie markers face down and then you place them out on the map, again face down. And they stay face down until they are within one hero's line of sight. Meaning that we do not know what we are facing until we see them. So when you have set up your game, you are pretty much ready to go. And the setup here takes no time at all. I mean, the biggest part of the setup is pretty much to placing out tokens on the map and on the table next to the map. And it goes really fast. But once we have set up everything and we are ready to go, we need to do one more thing before we actually start our campaign. And this is to determine our difficult levels, because we have 3 different levels. The easy one would be that you are allowed to replay one scenario twice, meaning that you can fail it twice and still keep on going. The next level would be that you get 6 replays during the whole campaign. Now this is of course a little bit more difficult, and you should consider starting on level 1 before you go to level 2. And the last level, level number 3, that one is hardcore, because here you have 0 replays throughout the whole campaign. Meaning that if you die, well then you die. Believe me when I say that you want to start on the first level, meaning the easy mode, before you venture out into this crazy dark world. But before we start looking at the gameplay itself, I think we should take a look at our player boards. So this here is your player board. And again, this is just a prototype, so some things might change until the finished product. But this is what it could look like. In the center, you have the picture of your character. Above your picture, you have your health track. Above the health track, you have your weapon slots. The one to the left is your ready weapon, and the one to your right is your offhand weapon. Beneath your picture, you can see your experience track, and below that you can see some extra abilities. These are abilities that you can acquire if you have the right amount of experience. Meaning that once you reach 20 experience, you could use them to get the preferred weapon ability. When you get 35 experience points, you can use them to get the big time operator, and so on. Up here is your supplies, ammo, medkits and grenades. And then to the far left we have personal objectives, because each character also have their own objectives that they would like to complete, as long as they are alive at least. And lastly, to the far right, we have 4 spaces where you can put your gear. This game is played out during a series of rounds, where we go through 3 different steps. First we have the initiative steps, where we find out if it is the zombies or the players that will get to go first. Then we go into the action phase, and this is where the characters and the zombies will do their activation and their actions. After that we will go into an end segment, where there might be some end of scenarios, triggers that will happen, but I will tell you more about that in a bit. First we need to do an initiative segment, meaning that we need to roll 1d12 for the players and 1d12 for the zombies. The zombies will receive a -4 to their roll, and the ones that get the highest roll has the initiative and gets to choose who will to take the first turn. If the zombies win, they always choose to go first. If we get a tie, we simply roll again. First thing we need to do is to remove any markers that are next to our character. These are markers that we have placed next to our character during our last turns. If we have moved, if we have shot, and so on. But I will tell you more about that in a bit. But we need to start by removing them. So now we are in phase number 2. And this is the action phase. This is where you will move around your little character on the board. And you can of course move, you can fire, you can open doors, you can do special actions, you can search. You can do a lot of things during your turn. And in this game we use movement points. Meaning that moving out on the map, opening doors, passing gears between the players will cost you movement points. And you can only move your character if it is the active character. Meaning that you cannot move this a few steps and then move another character. No, you need to move this character to the fullest until they are done. But let's take a look at how movement actually works out on the map. Before we move our character, we need to declare if they are stationary, walking or running. Because if they are walking, they will have 4 movement points. But if they are running, they will have the double, meaning that they will have 8 movement points. To simply move 1 step forward would cost you 1 movement point. But if you would like to turn 90 degrees, it will cost you 1 movement point if you are walking, but 2 movement points if you are running. If you instead choose to move your character sideways, this would cost you 2 movement points. And if you choose to back 1 step, this would also cost you 2 movement points. If you want to move through any obstructive terrain, meaning terrain outlined by a yellow line, this would cost you 2 movement points. You can also move diagonally if you want to, but moving forward 1 step diagonally would cost you 2 movement points, while moving backwards diagonally would cost you 3 movement points. If you want to pick up any gear out on the map, that would cost you 1 movement point. Unless you are running, because then it would actually cost you 2 movement points to pick up the gear while running. Out on the board you will also find some squares that are on fire. These will cost you 1 wound. And some of the squares will have a red line around them instead of a yellow one. These ones cannot be passed through. Whenever a character moves into line of sight of any of the tokens that we placed out during setup, we now need to reveal those tokens to show what zombie that hides beneath. During your different missions you will also encounter civilians or other soldiers out on the board. Just as the zombies, these are placed out as a question mark facing down. And when you reveal them, you will first then know what you're actually encountering. So during your turn you can choose to walk or run. But why would you choose to walk when you can run, right? Well, there are some penalties for running, because you do not need to use your full movement at once. You could, for example, run a few squares and then fire your weapon, and then keep on running again. But of course, if you are running and shooting at the same time, you will probably be a little bit shaky, right? So there will be some penalties. But I will tell you more about this in a bit. Because there are a few more actions out on the board that you can do that will cost you movement points. You can, for example, choose to hand over weapons or gears to one of your friends. But you can only do this if you are adjacent, meaning that if you are diagonal, you will not be able to do it. So this character here, for example, would need to move 1 step forward to actually give Jackson some gear. This would cost 2 movement points. And you can also choose to spend movement points to open doors. If you are walking, it will cost you 1 movement point. If you are running, it would cost you 2. If you want to switch weapons between your ready hand and your off hand, that would cost you 1 movement point. So that is movement, and it might seem like a lot, but it's really second nature once you have played through a couple of times. But it is important for you to keep a track on in which direction your character is facing. So you don't put your little standee here on the side or something, so you don't really know which way it is facing when you start your next turn. Plus, you remember these markers here that I told you about? Well, now it's time to place them out next to your character. If your character fired their weapon during this phase, you need to place out the little scope here next to your character, indicating that they have fired their weapon. But if they were stationary and did not fire their weapon, you put a 0 next to them. They are now considered to be covering for future phases. If they on the other hand walked but did not fire their weapon, you put a +2 marker next to the character, again indicating that they are in cover mode. And if they ran but did not fire, you put a 4 next to your character. Again, this will be used when the zombies gets to activate and move by your character. Then they will actually be able to attack during the zombies' turn. Because they have not fired their weapons, they have not used all their movement points, and they are in cover mode, waiting for a good opportunity to fire. Now, besides passing gears between each other, picking up weapons and movement, there is also special actions. These are usually that you search after something in the scenario itself. When you perform a special action, you may not do anything else during that turn. And you can only do a special action if it says on the scenario itself. And this is usually some type of objective or something else that you need to do and perform to be able to move on in this scenario. But remember that if your character is the one doing the special action, well, then they will use their entire movement point to do that action. But besides from what I've already shown you, you can of course also choose to attack your enemies. Before we look at the action, let's look at the weapons and what the different numbers mean. This weapon here is a Wembley, as we can see in the middle of the token. This weapon here has a rate of fire, meaning a number in the top left corner, of 1. This is how many die you get to roll when you attack with this weapon. In this case, 1d12. the stun/wound value of this weapon. In this case here we have 5 and 8. This means that it will cause a stun on +5 rolls, or a wound on a roll of 8 or higher. But this is before we add the attack modifiers. I will tell you more about that in a bit. Over here in the bottom right corner we have the range modifier, and this will add 1 for every square that you are beyond your point blank range. The number you see here in the middle, number 4, this is your point blank range. Meaning that if you are 4 squares away from your target, you would not add 1 to your modifier. But if you are 5 squares away from your target, going outside of your point blank range, you will add 1. In the right corner up here, we can see our hand-to-hand value. Meaning that if we are fighting hand-to-hand, we will use these values up here in the right corner when we roll our die to see if we stun or wound our target. Again, if we roll 6 or higher, we would stun them. If we roll 9 or higher, we would wound them. Now that we know how the weapons works, we are ready to see the action out on the board. Now, when you go into a battle, you first need to declare which target you would like to hit. But this target always needs to be the closest zombie. If there is a tie between 2 zombies, well, then you can of course choose as you will. And then you also need to tell what weapon you are attacking with. Once you have done this, you are ready to see if you can actually reach the target that you want to reach, and if you have line of sight. Before you attack your enemy, you need to declare which type of attack you are doing. There are 4 different types of attacks that are either normal, spread fire, hand-to-hand, or using a grenade. And then you of course need to choose the weapon that you can use to do that type of attack. Your arc of fire would be in front of your character, meaning that you cannot fire to the sides or backwards, unless you are throwing a grenade. But if you are firing, you would of course need to fire to your front. Your arc of fire would start from the spot where your character is located, and then going diagonal out to the sides. And to be able to actually hit your target, you need to have a clear line of sight, but also be within range of your weapon. Corners, like this one here for example, does not disturb your line of sight. Walls would of course stop your line of sight, and would make it impossible for you to hit your target. Hindering terrain does not disturb your line of sight, as you can shoot above them. But if there is a character between you and the target that you want to hit, you would need to roll a d12. And if you roll a 2, the character in between you and your target will get hit instead, and will take 1 wound. So now that we have determined our arc of fire, we have determined that we have line of sight, we also need to make sure that we are within range of the target that we want to reach. Each square on the map represents 1 range. The Webley that we are using here has a range of 4, meaning that we are within range because we have 1, 2, 3 squares to our target. So in this case here, we would not need to add any modifiers on the range because we are within point blank range. But if our target would have been beyond 4 squares away from our character, we would add a +1 modifier per square. So now we know that we can actually hit this target. The target is within our arc of fire, it is within reach, we have line of sight. But now we also might need to add some attack modifiers, and these modifiers will affect your stun or wound value. A positive modifier, meaning a plus that will add on, will make it harder for you to hit your target, while a negative one will make it easier. And there are a bunch of different modifiers. If you are not within reach, if your character are running, if you are shooting above hindering terrain, and so on. But let me show you a little bit about how it could look. In this case here, we are within line of sight, we are within reach, there's nothing in between the characters, so here there will not be any attack modifiers. If not, the player itself has some kind of modifier on their character board. If the zombie is stunned, you will get a negative modifier by 3, meaning that you get to withdraw 3 from your stun or wound value. If your figure is walking, there will be 0 modifiers, but if they are firing in stationary mode, there will be a -2 modifier. If they use spread fire, there will be +1 modifier, and if they use normal fire or throw a grenade, there will be 0 attack modifiers. If you're using spread fire, you will get a +1 modifier. If you're using your offhand weapon, you will get a +2 modifier. If you are throwing a grenade, you will get 0 modifier. But if you are throwing a grenade without having line of sight, you would have a +4 modifier. And if one of your friends is in between you and your target, you would get a +2 modifier per character in between you and your target. When you have calculated all your modifiers, you get to roll the amount of die stated on your weapon's rate of fire, meaning the top left corner of your weapon. And when you roll these die, you resolve one at a time, meaning that you roll one, and depending on what happens out on the board, you need to recalculate the modifiers until you roll your next die. Meaning that if you, for example, stun the zombie, well, you would need to recalculate the value to your next die roll. And every time you fire and you get 1 on the die result, you will lose 1 ammo. But you will only use 1 ammo even if you roll 3 die. So if you roll 1 die, you will lose 1 ammo, but you still get to roll the rest of your die. So when you have rolled all your die, you have recalculated your attack modifiers, you will eventually have a result out on the board. Maybe you have hit any of your comrades standing in the middle of the fire range, which would be quite stupid. Or if you've managed to hit your zombie, you might manage to kill them, you might manage to stun them, and so on. There are a bunch of different results that might happen depending on how the map and how your situation that you are in at the moment looks like. If you manage to wound any of your enemies, you will reduce their health by 1. And depending on which zombies you are facing, you might be able to get rid of them right away, like the betas, because they only have a health of 1. And the alphas here, for example, have a health of 2. And the omegas, the big bad ones, they have a health of 4. If you manage to kill the zombie, it is of course removed from the map. But if you do not manage to kill it, you need to place a little wound token next to it, and hopefully manage to kill it in the next strike. If you instead manage to stun the zombie, you place a stun next to the zombie. But please note, because if you manage to wound the zombie but not kill it, you would also place a stun marker next to the zombie. Because you have managed to reach both the stun value and the wound value, you just haven't killed it yet. And then you can choose to throw a grenade. But how do you actually do that? Well, when you have chosen the grenade, you need to throw it, of course. And to see if it lands on your target, you need to calculate the throw hit number. And then you need to roll a d12. But how do you calculate the throw hit number? Well, the number you need to roll equal to or higher than is the numbers of squares that your target is away from you. Meaning that if your target is 4 squares away, you would need to roll at least 4 or higher to be able to hit your target with the grenade. And you can throw a maximum of 8 squares. Because, well, you're not the Hulk. And when you throw a grenade, you may throw it to your front arc of fire, but also to the sides. And your character can throw grenades at characters that are not within line of sight. But if you choose to do this, you would get a penalty by +4 attack modifier. But you cannot, of course, throw the grenade through walls or close doors. If you manage to roll the right number and actually hit your target with the grenade, we now need to roll to see if we actually wounded or stunned it. And we will do that again by checking our little stun and wound value on the grenade, and then roll the die. The grenade will activate at the end of a character's activation, meaning that you could throw the grenade and then you can run away. And where the grenade lands, it will affect all zombies or characters within the point-blank range of that grenade. So be sure that you actually hit your target and that your friends are not in the way, because that might be quite devastating. And that is how you attack a target. But I did tell you about the spread fire, right? Because we have normal fire. This is where you are just aiming at one opponent, directly firing at them. But spread fire is where you, well, spread the fire, trying to hit multiple targets or one target several times. But of course there is a little penalty here, because you will get +1 attack modifier. And you would need to have a rate of fire of 2, meaning that if this is 1, you cannot do spread fire. But then you would also get to shoot several times, meaning that you could use one die to fire at one target. Then you could use the next die to fire at the next target. Or shoot the same target one more time. But again, you would need to recalculate the attack modifiers per die. So if you shoot one and you hit, you would need to recalculate the modifier for the next hit. And if you choose to shoot at another target, but that target is further away from the one that you have just shot, you will lose 1 die per empty square between the targets. Meaning that if your second target is 1 square further away than your first, you would lose 1 die. If there's 2 squares away, well, you would lose 2 die, which is quite a lot. And you still need to hit the closest zombie first. Once you have done that, you can shoot the others that are in line of sight. But besides shooting and throwing grenades, you can of course also do hand-to-hand combat. This will always happen if you are adjacent to the targets. Then you cannot shoot and you would need to fight. And some of the weapons are specially made for hand-to-hand combat. A weapon that is made for hand-to-hand combat will have an H in the bottom right corner of the weapon. And remember that I said that if you do not fire your weapon during your turn, you can be put in covering mode. Meaning that if the zombies walk within line of sight of your character, you can now choose to shoot the character instead. And a covering attack would work just like a normal one. But there will be some modifiers, of course, depending on what your status says. If, for example, you did not move, meaning that your status is at 0, you will have 0 modifiers. But if you walked, you will have 2 modifier. And if you instead ran, well, you will have +4 attack modifier. And once a covering figure fires, they will lose their covering status and need to change their die to the shot fire status instead. You will of course also lose your covering status if you should be locked in by any zombie. When all the player characters have been activated, moved around, fired and so on, it's time for us to move into the zombie phase. And the first step in the zombie phase is to activate any non-stunned zombies. When we activate the zombies out on the map, all zombies must be activated, one at a time, and we start with the ones that are closest to the characters. But if any zombies are ever equally distant to a character, the player chooses who is activated first. If any of the zombies would be stunned by the start of the activation, they will not activate during this round, but we will simply move the status token instead. And that zombie will not do anything else during this round. Depending on which zombie we are activating, they will have a different amount of movement points, just as their health. And they will always move towards their closest either civilian or character out on the board. the zombies can move any way out on the map. Diagonal, forward and backward. They cannot, however, move through walls, of course. Each square the zombie is moving counts as one step. And if they start their turn next to another character, they will not move. They will instead attack. Zombies cannot open doors because, well, they're stupid. If the zombie does not have a clear path to any target, they will not move at all. In this case here, for example, the zombie is stuck in this room, as they cannot open the door and go out. And the zombies will always move the closest path to their target, and they will always target the one that is the closest. So there will be some situations where you will need to recalculate the path for each step that the zombie has taken. And the zombie, as I said, can move diagonal, but at least one square in the diagonal path to the side of the path needs to be clear. Meaning that if it's closed in like this, the zombie cannot move through it. There needs to be at least some space for it. So that's the way a zombie moves. They will always target the one that is the closest, either a civilian or soldier or a character. Because, well, they are quite lazy. They will never move over hindering terrain, and they will always move the shortest distance to their target. Now, before you move your zombies, you need to see which type it is, because different zombies will have different amounts of movement. The normal base zombies, they will have a movement of 1, but the more advanced, like the Omegas for example, they can have 2 movement points. So before you make the movements, make sure to just notice which zombie you are moving. But when the zombies have moved out on the map, it's time for them to attack. And if they are adjacent to a character that is locked to them in hand-to-hand combat, well, then they will start to fight. If that character is not locked to them in hand-to-hand combat, well, then they will lock them in. So if this beta zombie here, for example, starts its activation next to a character that is not already locked in, they will lock that character in. Now this character cannot move and cannot walk away from this zombie, as they are locked in together. The character would now be needed to be facing the zombie. But the zombie will not attack the character during this activation. For now, they only lock them in. But if they are still locked in together during its next activation, then it will start to inflict wounds. But if the zombie starts its activation next to the character, they will inflict 1 wound to the character that they are locked in with. And they can only be locked in with 1 character at a time. If a character ever moves into one of the 4 adjacent spaces next to an active zombie, meaning a zombie that is not stunned, the character needs to stop. They can, however, change if they want to be facing the zombie so they can attack, but they need to have some movement points left to actually change their orientation. If, however, the zombie is stunned when the character moves into any of the adjacent squares, the character may continue taking their movement actions as normal, as the zombie is stunned and cannot move. But if there is 2 stunned zombies standing diagonal, the character cannot move in between them, since there simply would be no space. And the same thing would apply if this would have been obstructive terrain. 1 square needs to be free for the character to be able to move diagonally, which just makes sense. For a character to break out of a locked position, they need to roll some die, and we would resolve this just as we did with the hand-to-hand combat. You need to roll the die, and if you get equal to or higher than the stun amount of your weapon, you will break the lock. But you will of course not stun or wound the zombie, you will simply just get out of their grip. And this die roll does not count towards your attack, it is simply you breaking free. If or when a character dies, they are now out of the campaign, and you cannot use the same character in future scenarios again. Once they have been killed, they will rise up again, because now they are zombies as well. And they will have the same stats as a beta zombie, but they will be a little bit harder to kill, because every attack against them gets a +1 attack modifier. If this new character zombie is not killed during this scenario, their token will go into the pool of zombies in the future. Their character token goes into each subsequent scenario zombie pool in the future, until they are eventually killed. But once the zombies have made their activation, it's time for us to just move the little round track down here on the round track. And if we hit any of the symbols that has an S on them, rather it's S1, 2 or 3, depending on how many spawn location there is out on the board itself, we need to spawn some zombies. So when we hit any of these down here, we need to spawn some zombies out on the map. And we can see where the zombie is spawning by simply reading. This one here says S1, meaning that a zombie would spawn at S1 out on the map. To place a zombie, we need to at random draw one of the face down zombie tokens that we placed in a pool during setup, remember? So we take one of these and place it out face down on the spawn location. Again, when this token comes into line of sight of any of the characters, it will be revealed. And then we will know what zombie is beneath. And this is done immediately, meaning that if the zombie would spawn in a location that is within line of sight of one of the characters, it would pop out on the map right away. If the pool of zombies are ever emptied when you are going to spawn a new one, you would simply need to take the discarded tokens, shake them all up and pull a new one. Zombies just do not stop coming. They will come at you at all directions. And this is the way the game goes on. We start at the first phase where we remove any covered tokens. And then we would go into the character phase where they get to move and shoot or search or whatever they want to do. We then have the zombie phase where the zombies will activate. We will go down on the track down here to see if we need to spawn any zombies during this round. And eventually you will probably die a few times, but hopefully also manage to complete the scenario. And depending on which scenario you are playing, well, the scenarios will end in a bunch of different ways. When you have managed to actually finish the scenario, you need to read the exit part of the scenario to see what will happen. And it's important that you do not read this before you have finished the scenario, as it will pretty much spoil the experience. We would also need to read the between scenarios section, because this will describe what will happen in between this scenario until your next scenario. Maybe you will get some benefits, maybe you will get some, well, penalties. And depending on how the story goes, there are a bunch of different things that might happen. During your campaign, you will of course be able to find more medkit, ammo, but also different gear that will help you in your campaign. And of course you will also be able to find more weapons, to upgrade your weapons, get better weapons, stronger weapons, to help you along in your endeavors. The cool thing here is that this game is a living story. So depending on what you do out on the map, it will trigger different things in the story. In this scenario here, for example, if you choose to go into a lab room, you need to read a specific entry in this book. In this book, it will say what will happen when you enter that room. Maybe you meet a person, maybe you find supplies, and so on. But also in the way you finish the games, depending on which exit you choose, or if you end up choosing another route, or so on, it will say and tell you to read a specific entry in the book. And then the story will evolve and continue, all depending on which choices you make. Meaning that you could play the same scenarios over and over again and probably get completely different endings and completely different roads on your journey. And of course, as you go along, your character also will evolve. It will get new skills, more supplies, but also their personal objectives, remember? Because besides just the main objectives, you have the little secondary objectives out on the board, but you also have your own character's objectives that you can fulfill if you want to, and that will also bring some more information about the story, what is going on, what does this character want to do with their journey. And along the way you will of course also meet new characters. In each of these chapters you can have a maximum of 2 characters per scenario, but you can have a whole team of 4 characters. Some of these characters will probably not make it to the end of the story. But I mean, that's a part of it, right? You go in together, you try to fight it out, you try to make it out alive. And sadly, well, we all won't make it. So did I enjoy this game? Yes, I enjoyed this game a lot. This is right up my alley. I mean, I love zombies. I love the stories here. I love when the world keeps building up and you just find out pieces along the way. The scenarios are really well made. And I mean, I love this when you just have this little book here. It's just such an easy setup to just put it right out on the table and then you just put the different pieces out. It makes the setup so easy, and I think that more dungeon crawlers and campaign games should really use something like this, because it just makes our lives so much easier and it will actually make the game hit the table. But besides that, I love the artwork, I love the way the text goes on. I mean, you really feel like you are in World War II fighting zombies, trying to make it out. You want to know what happens between the different scenarios. You don't want to know what happens in the next scenario. And the game really makes it feel like your choices matter. Like what you want to do in one scenario and what you actually end up doing will affect your story. And that is a big part. You do not just roll a die and hopefully make it. You don't really care. No, you are invested in this game. You want to make it out alive and you want to complete this quite well little book here. And if you want to, you can also get some miniatures to this game to really pump up your experience. But what I love about this game is that you do not need miniatures. You can choose to just use the tokens, you can choose to just use the standees, or you can go all the way and get the miniatures. But you don't need to, it's all up to you, which I think is just brilliant. There you have it, my friend. That was Escape from Projekt Riese from Raybox Games. This is an epic zombie game. I really like the rules in this one. I really like how the mechanic works. There are quite a few rules, but once you have gone through a few turns, you will know what you can or cannot do, and the rules basically become second nature, and it's all pretty logical. I mean, of course you can't run through a wall. Of course when you see a zombie it's the first time you understand what zombie it is, because you can't see through walls. So there are few rules here, but they're all quite logic. And this one here is actually the follow-up on Escape from Stalingrad set. So this here is actually the beginning of this game. You can of course play them in any order you would like to, but if you want to play them in the right order, you should start with this. There will be links down in the description to everything you need to know, so be sure to check that out. This game will be out on Kickstarter quite soon, and I know that there will be follow-up games on this one too. They have planned a bunch of cool stuff on this game, so this universe that they are built up here won't just stop with this game. If you like this video, my friend, please give it a little thumbs up, throw in a comment there for me, maybe subscribe to the channel if you like to. It gives me a smile on my lips every time. But most importantly, until next time, my friend, please remember to keep on spreading that board gaming love I know you all have. Peace.